Hey, amazing viewers, I love connecting with you all around the world. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share will leave you inspired and ready to take control of your own life. In today's story, you'll hear about an incredible twist that no one saw coming. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. It was supposed to be a routine flight, one of those journeys that doesn't demand much thought. Just the usual humdrum of boarding, settling in, and finding that quiet zone where the world outside the plane becomes a blur of clouds and distant horizons. Patricia Langford, a woman used to the comforts of privilege, walked through the bustling terminal at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport with the ease of someone who had done this hundreds of times. The designer tote bag on her arm glided behind her like a well-choreographed accessory to her professional attire, her every step radiating confidence. She had seen this airport before, felt the familiarity of the route, and most importantly, knew what she was entitled to. First class. It was the only way she ever traveled, and it was a routine she had come to expect. The priority boarding, the complimentary champagne, the whispers of other passengers who, like her, belonged to the realm of the elite. It was a world that seemed predicated on predictability. But as she neared her row, a jolt of irritation shot through her. There, seated with quiet composure, was a black man. His crisp navy blue suit stood in stark contrast to the luxurious environment around him, and his presence in what was her seat, her sacred space, immediately unsettled her. Her steps faltered for a split second, her lips pressing into a tight line. The man didn't even notice her at first. He was too absorbed in his work, his laptop open, his eyes scanning the screen, as though he were reviewing some important documents. Patricia exhaled sharply, a mix of disbelief and something darker forming in the pit of her stomach. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. Without thinking, she set her designer tote bag down with a little too much force, making a deliberate show of settling into her seat. The seat beside her -2A wasn't supposed to be occupied by anyone else, especially not by someone like him. She tried to steady her breath, but the irritation bubbled to the surface. She was a regular in first class. She had every right to expect things to be the way they always were. So when the man next to her barely acknowledged her presence, her anger began to build. It was as if he had no idea how this was supposed to go. He wasn't supposed to be here, at least, not in the way he was. The quiet confidence he exuded was something she couldn't fathom. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't shifting uncomfortably. He was just existing, and that made her uncomfortable in a way she hadn't expected. Patricia shifted in her seat, pretending to adjust her clothing, though her eyes never left the man beside her. She let her purse accidentally nudge his armrest. No reaction. It was as if he didn't even care. That, too, infuriated her. She glanced around, almost expecting someone to come to her rescue, to see her discomfort and understand the unfairness of it. But nothing changed. No one noticed. The silence between them grew heavier, more suffocating. She didn't feel safe. It was the kind of feeling that made her stomach turn. He had every right to be there, but her world wasn't supposed to be challenged like this. Everything she knew about air travel, about her place in it, was now in question. That was when it hit her. Patricia Langford wasn't the type of woman to let things slide. No, she wasn't about to let this man remain in her space, in her world, without making her presence felt. This was her world, and no one could take that from her. And so, she decided it was time to act. But little did she know, this decision would lead to something entirely unexpected. The airplane cabin was quiet, almost too quiet. The hum of the engines, the soft murmur of fellow passengers adjusting their seats, and the occasional rattle of the overhead compartments were the only sounds that filled the space. But Patricia wasn't paying attention to any of that. Her mind was laser-focused on the man beside her. Every minute, every passing second felt like an eternity, as her frustration churned within her. Her fingers drummed against the armrest, a rhythmic pattern that betrayed the simmering tension in her chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. She was the one who deserved comfort and peace. She had paid for that privilege. So why was this man sitting in her space, acting as if nothing was wrong? She glanced toward the flight attendant, a young woman in her early 30s named Emily Jacobs. Emily was across the aisle, helping passengers with their carry-ons, her demeanor calm and professional. Patricia's eyes narrowed. This wasn't something that could be allowed to stand. She had to do something. Patricia pressed the call button, the soft chime echoing through the cabin. Emily appeared almost immediately, her smile warm and practiced, the kind of smile that came with years of customer service experience. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" she asked politely. Patricia forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think there's been a mix-up," she said, her voice calm but laced with an underlying tension. "I believe this gentleman is in the wrong seat." Emily glanced over at Daniel Stokes, who, up until now, had been completely absorbed in his work. He didn't even look up. His expression remained unreadable as he typed away on his laptop, his fingers moving with a quiet precision. Emily stepped forward, tablet in hand, scanning the seating chart with practiced efficiency. "Actually, ma'am, Mr. Stokes is in his correct seat. He's assigned to 2B, and your seat is 2A, she replied politely. Patricia blinked, her grip tightening on the armrest. "That's odd," she said, forcing a laugh. "I'm sure there's been some mistake. I don't think this is right." Emily, sensing the subtle shift in Patricia's demeanor, gave a small nod. "I've checked the manifest, and everything appears to be in order, ma'am. Mr. Stokes is in his assigned seat." She said it with such calm assurance, but Patricia could feel the edges of her composure start to crack. Patricia didn't like being told she was wrong. She didn't like the feeling of losing control. And now, as she sat there, stewing in her own anger, she realized that something deeper than mere irritation was at play. It wasn't about the seat. It wasn't even about the fact that the man beside her was black. No, it was about something more insidious. It was about power. About how, in her world, she was the one who called the shots. She wasn't used to being challenged. She wasn't used to being made to feel uncomfortable. And now that this man was defying her expectations, defying her world, Patricia's mind began to spin. She wasn't going to let this slide. No, this man needed to understand that he didn't belong here. So she pressed the call button again. This time, the moment felt different. The cabin was still, the tension palpable. Emily returned, her expression unreadable, but her patience clearly thinning. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but there are no available seats in first class," Emily said, glancing at the seating chart. "There's no room in economy either." Patricia's face flushed. "I'm not asking for economy," she spat, her voice lower now, almost venomous. "I simply don't feel comfortable sitting next to him." And that was when it happened. For the first time since boarding, Daniel Stokes put down his laptop and turned his attention to Patricia. His eyes met hers, calm but unwavering. He didn't say a word, but in that moment, something shifted. Patricia felt it, like a weight in the air. He wasn't fazed by her words, nor by the tension she had deliberately stirred. His calmness in the face of her escalating frustration was like a quiet force that made her own anger feel almost irrelevant. And then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. A glint of metal caught the light. Patricia froze. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but in that moment, the entire atmosphere in the cabin seemed to change. Daniel didn't need to say anything. The FBI badge he revealed, glinting slightly in the fluorescent cabin light, spoke volumes, and Patricia Langford suddenly found herself caught in the web of a situation she had never expected. What happened next would shake her to her core. The moment of truth. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath as the glint of Daniel's FBI badge caught the light. It wasn't a grand gesture, no dramatic announcement. Just the subtle flash of authority that hung in the air like an undeniable truth. Patricia's gaze locked onto the badge, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. She had expected resistance. But this was something different. For a moment, the world around her seemed to blur. The noise of the airplane, the murmurs of the passengers, all of it faded into the background as the weight of the situation settled over her like a heavy fog. Daniel didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His eyes remained steady, unflinching, as he slowly tucked the badge back into his jacket pocket. It was the calm confidence of someone who knew exactly how to handle the moment. Patricia's face turned crimson, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't the confrontation she had imagined. She had thought she could make a simple request, force him to move, and put the situation behind her. But now she was the one who felt exposed. The power dynamic had shifted, and for the first time, she realized the depth of her own assumptions and biases. In the silence that followed, Emily, the flight attendant, cleared her throat. She stood by, watching the interaction with quiet attentiveness, but she didn't need to intervene. The atmosphere had already changed. The balance of power subtly but unmistakably realigned. There were no more words needed. The message had been delivered. Patricia could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the quiet murmurings of a few who had witnessed the exchange. The shame crept into her chest, a bitter reminder of how easily she had let her prejudices guide her actions. She had assumed that her discomfort, her sense of entitlement, justified her treatment of Daniel. But now she was faced with the stark realization that her assumptions had been wrong, deeply wrong. As the plane continued its flight, Patricia sank back into her seat, her eyes fixed on the window. She couldn't escape the reflection staring back at her. The woman who thought she could dictate the space around her, the woman who believed her privilege made her untouchable, was now confronted with a hard truth. And that truth was simple. No one is above respect. In the end, the situation wasn't about the seat, or even about who was right or wrong. It was about something deeper, something far more important. It was about acknowledging the inherent worth of every person, regardless of their background, race, or social standing. It was about recognizing that every individual deserves dignity and respect, especially when they are least expected to demand it. Daniel's quiet strength in the face of Patricia's escalating frustration was a powerful reminder. It was a lesson in grace under pressure, in holding your ground without the need for confrontation. And as the plane touched down at its destination, Patricia could only reflect on how one small moment of humility had the power to completely change the course of her day, and perhaps her life. The story wasn't about winning or losing. It was about growth. It was about learning to challenge your own assumptions, to examine the biases that quietly govern your actions, and to realize that true power lies not in demanding others move aside, but in learning to share space with respect and understanding. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Patricia sat quietly, not just because she had been humbled, but because she had been given an opportunity to change. The choice, now, was hers. And in that moment, she understood. True strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room, but about being the most compassionate one.